Not sure how to measure your internal communications? Prove the worth of your internal communication strategy with Contact Monkey's email solution built into Outlook and Gmail. With Contact Monkey, you will be able to track and analyze employee engagement from your inbox. Start measuring email opens, link clicks, location tracking, and various forms of employee feedback, such as Employee Net Promoter Score. To try Contact Monkey's free demo, visit www.contactmonkey.com/ICPro. I'm Sarah Jackson. Welcome to Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. This season, we're closing the gap. I've tracked down the experts that can help us as internal communicators close the gap from where we are now to where we need to be. We're connecting the dots to drive value and lead from the inside out.
The moment you invest in measurement, this is the moment you can actually ask for a little bit more resources in tools. Suddenly, once you have numbers, everyone is very, very interested because they can communicate about those numbers with confidence.
That's our friend from Google, Pierre Le Leannec. He's the internal comms manager for the tech giant. And today we continue our conversation on how to close the gap between taking a mere snapshot to painting a holistic picture of your internal communications. Now, last week we started with the measurement basics, and today we take one step closer to the pro side of Internal Comms Pro and dive into how Pierre aggregates the data, his measurement methodology, and steps on how to maintain your measurement program. This and much more on today's show.
We actually are sometimes going a little bit further than that. Most of our data aggregation system is a lot of our data aggregation system is relying on Google Analytics. Again, this is a product that most of your audience is probably familiar with, and maybe that they use them. They used it in the past. We are using it for our own internal needs. So whenever we have an event, we host the video, the replay video, usually on a website, an internal website, and we have a Google Analytics tracker on this website. So we have access to the data that you can aggregate with data analytics. Same for the video content that we share. Same for the websites that we create. Same for a document, let's say a presentations or a Google Doc that we create. We can attach tracker to links and share that with the organization. Now, if you're familiar with Google Analytics, you know that you can get actually quite a lot of information. And I mentioned the very basic and the data that we capture on most of the campaign, the very basic ones like the number of views or opens. But depending on the campaign, depending on the organization we work with, we want to capture sometimes a little bit more data. So for instance, in the number of views, we may be interested in the number of views coming from a specific continent, or coming from a specific country, or coming from a specific city. This is something that is very helpful on distributed organizations, or organizations that are not always located on the same place. And these days, with everyone working from all over the place, having access to the geographic distribution of your views is possibly going to give you a lot of interesting insights. You may be also interested to have access on the distribution over time of the access to your website, or the access to your content, be it a video or a presentation hosted somewhere on your intranet. You can also look at the type of devices that people are using to access to your content. So yeah, you have access to a lot of data with Google Analytics, and depending on your campaign, depending on what are the objectives of your organization, those are metrics that could be interesting for you to track. I do not track all those metrics for all the campaigns internally, because well, it does not always make sense for the team that are creating those campaigns. But that being said, sometimes it does. What I'm very focused on are those basic metrics, so the number of views and the qualitative feedback, and the scoring element, and what people share about the events, the qualitative and the quantitative, the basic ones. This is something that first you want to nail within your organization, because those are this is the common denominator in your measurement campaigns. Once you have those basic that are correctly set up, you can potentially expand and add more metrics to cater the need of your specific campaign. But having those basic metrics is also extremely helpful, because that's how you create baseline within the organization. That's how you also create comparisons elements. In the most important element in a campaign is going to be the consistency of the process, the setup for measuring everything, and the methodology. If you change methodology, if you do one-off measurement operations where you capture only one event, the data is going to probably be very interesting by itself, but you're missing most of the value if you do not track it over time in a consistent manner, because that's where you start detecting the trends. That's when you are going to be able to get really the comparison where you have most of the juice of your analytics that is going to appear. If it is only happening one time over a short period of time, then this is a little bit of a wasted effort, in my opinion. It needs to be a long-term effort, and that's why I was also referring as measurement as an investment, because it takes time. It takes a lot of time to build the interesting data and elements that the team is going to really be able to extract value from.
Mm-hmm. That is such a good tip, to know that it's going to take a long time. And I think this idea of developing your measurement methodology. How do I come up with my measurement methodology? Is it start with the leadership's objectives? How do you develop this methodology?
I would recommend to start with what is actually technically feasible, what is reasonably feasible to do, to measure. So that's why I recommend to start with the basic, making sure that you have the basic right, because the moment you have the basic right, you can start iterate, and you can start adding more layer of complexity to your data. You can start cross reference and get more details in the analysis. So to get the basic right, I would recommend to choose those common denominators that are going to work across the organization. Depending on the size of your organizations, the number of products your company is managing, the number of teams that you are going to support, you may want to do comparisons within the organization. So that's why it's important to choose those basic metrics that are going to work across the organization. Otherwise, you end up with measurement programs that are unfortunately very hard to maintain, and measurement programs that works in silos, and not very helpful for cross organization company-wide analysis. So by the basic metrics that we have at Google is views. Views works for the number of it works for events. Because we will be able to track the number of views on the events, the number of views on videos, the number of views on live stream, the number of views on the platform that we use to capture the questions that people want to ask during events. We also use opens opens would probably translate to views as well. It's the most basic metrics that you can have in an email campaign. And we also will use views for access to content that would be hosted on a website, if it's a presentation, if it's a document. And obviously as well views for videos, if you created a specific videos for specific campaigns, for a specific campaign. So yeah, view is probably the most basic element that you may want to capture, to start capturing. Again, we are using a mix of Google Analytics, which is very well designed for that, and also some internal tools. I don't know if your audience is familiar with Google Sites, but it's actually a product that Google offer. You can create sites, and you can restrict the sites to specific domains. So you can kind of create your own small mini intranet, which is very helpful. And if your audience is not using Google Sites, which is absolutely fine, I'm sure that they can integrate Google Analytics tracker or any type of tracker to their own intranet, or to their own channels, depending on the way they share content internally. Yeah, Google Analytics is pretty versatile, and it has been very helpful for us to capture those basic data and more. Because once you have the basic data, that's when you can start to be a bit more granular and a bit more specific in your analysis.
I love that. Well, we use Google Analytics at Internal Comms Pro, and we should note that isn't there a free certification program that you can totally go through that
Yeah.
will teach you, and even opening Google Analytics, if you're new to measurement, just to look through the list will give you a snapshot of really quickly all the things that you can measure. But again, I think you make such a good point, is with internal communicators, typically they are underwater, they are doing the tactical. So before you go down the measurement road, to realize it's going to be long term, to develop the right methodology, to start with basic stuff that you can be consistent, to find those common denominators. I just think those are really good tips before you jump, in with both feet, to the deep end on this thing.
And until now, I've been very, very tactical, and probably not nothing that I've been sharing is that exciting. And I'm sure that your audience have probably heard about some elements that I talked about, because I know that some of your previous guests in this podcast, they also referred about measurements, and measurement is definitely something that is considered as a critical mix of the internal communications campaign. Now, I would like to share one element, which is how to aggregate your data, how to start analyzing and automate the analysis of your data. Because right now I've been focusing a lot on the aggregation of the data, which is obviously a very important part of the process, making sure that you have consistently data that is comparable, that is auditable, in a sense that it is using the same methodology, that is using the same process. But how do you want to present and share that data? How do you want to analyze that data? If you rely on spreadsheets, for instance, if you integrate all of those data in spreadsheets, this is a great starting point. But unfortunately, you're going to be very reliant on those spreadsheets, and it's going to take a little bit of analysis to synchronize everything. A spreadsheet is living on your desktop computer, or if you're using Google Drive and Google Sheets, you can potentially share that with a link, but it still remains a fairly static way to do the analysis of the data. because you are going to basically share static reports with your audience. And at best, they have some filter controls, but they cannot necessarily explore the data by themselves. There is a tool that I cannot recommend enough. It's called Data Studio. Again, this is a Google tool, so I'm sorry. I feel like
You're fine. You're
I'm
fine.
I'm doing a lot of commercial announcements, but the thing is, it's actually a free tool. So Data Studio is a fantastic tool to explore the data that you aggregated. So we talked for the past few minutes about the data aggregation, making sure that you have a process that you can manage, a process that is that you can duplicate and replicate over time. And once you have the data, all this data can be aggregated, synced in real time, synchronized in real time in Data Studio. And Data Studio is great at aggregating data from different sources. So you can aggregate the data from several Google Analytics accounts. You can aggregate the data from several spreadsheets if you're using spreadsheets to collect the data. You can be also very fancy if you have SQL or databases in your organization where you have some interesting relevant information. You can use that as well in Data Studio. You can also use BigQuery, which is also a way to store a large volume of data. You can aggregate all of this data in Data Studio. And the fantastic part of Data Studio is not only the aggregation of the data and the data visualization of the data, because you have a lot of graphical widgets that you can add to your Data Studio dashboard. Once you have your dashboard, you can actually share it with stakeholders. And that is the most powerful element with a dashboard. Once you share the dashboard with stakeholders, you can add filters, you can add controls where your stakeholders are going to explore the data by themselves. So you are removing the pain of being the bottleneck for the reporting. You are giving a reporting tool for your stakeholders, and let's say that suddenly one of your stakeholders wants to compare the numbers of this quarter with last quarter. Just by giving them access to the dashboard, they can do that by themselves very quickly, because they can change the filter, they can change the time frame of the analysis by themselves. They do not have access to the source of the data, but they can visualize the data. They can see the actual content. They are not going to be able to modify the data, but they are going to be able to access all the content that is aggregated in Data Studio. So this is almost the cherry on the top of your measurement campaign, making sure that you aggregate all of your data in a way that is making sense. And dashboards are a fantastic way to make sense, because suddenly all your efforts are displayed, and all your efforts are charted in a way that is correlated with, or that is cross-referenced with the different metrics that you're selecting. So not only you are accessing numbers, or you're accessing specific metrics, but you have the trends that you can see and visualize in front of your eyes. So a very powerful way to make the analysis, but also a very powerful way to share the analysis.
And I think when you talk about this being long term, that it would strike me that having a tool like this, and really the lesson is to make sure that you can present the data, that it is in real time. If this is long term, then it don't you think doing this also keeps leadership with you, so that you keep getting their buy-in to what the internal comms team is doing, and that you're showing a level of thinking where hopefully our listeners then would get more tools and be able to build, get more resources if they're able to display the data in these types of ways. Does that make sense?
When I joined Google about 3.5 years ago, I was not hired for my measurement skills. I was hired as a content producer. But before joining Google, I was also I had some experience in the external communications world, and when you work in agencies, the moment you create content, you sometimes have access to a lot of very interesting data about the performance of your campaign. I was missing some of these data at Google. There were some efforts, but it was not necessarily as comprehensive as it could be. And so I started working on numbers and analytics and measurement for myself first. But very rapidly, this is something that got a lot of attention from my management team, from my bosses, the bosses of my boss, and very rapidly from the leadership, because this data is something that demonstrates the performance of your work in a very reliable way. And the moment you can demonstrate your work in a very reliable way, it makes everyone looking really good. So the moment you invest in measurement, this is the moment you can actually ask for a little bit more resources in times or in tools. We have a lot of tools that we use for ourselves at Google. We're at Google, so we have a lot of tools that exist internally. So this is not necessarily something that is part of the equation. But I would suspect that for an external, for an organization or for any company, if they do not have access to all the tools that Google has, they can potentially make the case to access some tools for themselves, starting with something as simple as an email platform, an email campaign platform. To make sure that you measure your emails. If you're not measuring emails for your internal communications, I suspect that you are missing a lot of data. So that would be my first starting point. And from there, you can aggregate data from your websites, from your intranets, your website, I mean, being internal websites, from your intranets, from the various elements of content that you create. I mentioned that it's quite easy to add a tracker to a link that you share. And the moment you do that, you have access to a lot of data about the number of clicks, the number of views, the views over time, the geographic distribution of the views, the number of the number of minutes people spent on the page. All of that is actually accessible the moment you start digging into it. But yes, measurement is an investment. The moment you start, it will probably be a self-fulfilling prophecy, in a sense that once you start demonstrating the impact of your communications, once you start demonstrating the benefits of measurement, that's when you usually have the possibility to convince your colleagues or your leadership that it makes sense to spend a little bit more time in investment.
Each internal comms team has goals that may ebb and flow depending on your current strategy. That's why Circle Broadcast, a cross-channel internal comms solution, aggregates your employee and channel data that are important to you using custom dashboards. You can easily build and share your custom reports with stakeholders that truly showcase your value add. Interested in an engagement platform with insights that go beyond basic analytics? Visit circle.com/insights to learn more. That's CERKL.com/insights. I love that Pierre has connected the dots on the benefits of showing the reliability of your work through solid measurement. Now, in this next part, Pierre gets into the details of how to lay out the sequence of your questions on your feedback form. Yes, he even gives us his actual questions that he uses on his forms. And Pierre dove into the channels Google uses to engage its employees and how they measure the effectiveness of their internal platforms. Pierre also offers to create a cheat sheet for us that captures his checklist of all that you should be measuring. And to top it all off, he gives us the questions he and his team ask before investing in creating a piece of content. Yes, you know it. It will all be available on internalcommspro.com/show notes. Now let's jump back in. So the internal platforms, are you able to share kind of what channels you use to engage Google employees and how you measure the effectiveness of your internal platforms? Is it through Google Analytics?
So Google Analytics is a very important part of the mix of tools in. It's an important tools in our toolbox, but it's not the only one. So I mentioned Google Form. Google Forms is key in capturing the qualitative feedback that I mentioned before. Let me do a quick digression about Google Forms, because I would like to share with the audience some of our learnings, and the main one is that there is a sequence in asking questions. The sequencing of your questions is going to be very important, and that's one of the things that we've been crafting over the past years. And I'm sure that there are still a lot of things that we can improve, but some learnings that I would like to share with your audience. The first one is that the scoring needs to be consistent all across the organization. At Google, we have a company-wide survey happening every year that is assessing how the employee feels about the company. This company-wide assessment is pretty famous. It's called the Google Geist, and it's using a 5-point scale. So when we created our scoring system, it was making sense that we were keeping the same scoring system, the 5-point scale system. I would recommend that you keep consistency as for the way to assess scores in your organization as well. So that is the first thing, and you obviously want to keep the form as tight as possible and as small as possible. So this five point scale system is going to be helpful doing that, and you don't want to multiply the number of scores that you want to ask. So in our case, we have one scoring for the quality of the presentation, one scoring system for the quality of the answers, the Q&A. We have also a scoring system for how people felt about the content, or how the people felt about the event in terms of pride. Does this make them proud to work at Google? So we have usually 3 or 4 questions that we ask with this 5-point scale system, and that is how we assess the scoring of our events, of our newsletter, of our content. And this is reproducible. This is something that can be applied to any of your content. So that is the for the scoring part of the form. When you have submissions in Google Forms, you can ask questions about what do you have any additional feedback to share. This is something that we used to find a lot in the previous Google Forms, but it was not yielding actionable results, because when you think about it, people are going to literally share any additional feedback, and it's very hard to sort this feedback through. So you have to maybe introduce that question first. So instead of having just one question, a general question, do you have any additional feedback? We start with, what was your favorite part? So it is very helpful for us having this first question, because then we start understanding what is the content that is performing better than the other. And it's also a great way to make sure that people are actually sharing their feedback in a constructive way. Because the second question, which is arguably the most important in the whole form, is what should we skip next time? So first we start with what did you like? The second is what should we skip next time? What is it you didn't like? And it's going to be very helpful to, again, improve the content or the campaign that we are working with, and it has been very, very helpful for all of the channels and all of the campaigns that we are measuring, because over time you have the possibility to really tailor your campaign to what your audience is expecting to see. And when you think about it, this is probably the best way to create content, by making sure that your content is actually replying to the need of your audience. And finally, the last question is, do you have any additional feedback? From there, obviously, we have a little bit less submissions, but it is much structured. We have less submissions because people already shared what they like and what they didn't like, so that usually covers most of the submissions. But having this last element is also a great way to share additional feedback. And all of that is usually captured with the email address of the participants, in case you want to close the loop, in case you want to reply to those people. So those people who shared their suggestions on what to skip next time, this is very actionable feedback. On a newsletter, what should you skip? What should you improve on let's say, the format or the content? This is usually a very actionable feedback. And that's where you want to close the loop with your audience when you have a feedback form. But I think that that it is important to think about the right sequence for the scoring and for the questions that you ask in the feedback form, so it yields the right results.
Yeah, that is such good tip on how to do that. That there is a kind of a method to the madness on how you structure those forms. And I love using Google Forms. I think it's such a slick tool and so easy to use as well. But to have this kind of
It is very
information,
easy.
yeah, it's so good. And the other thing too is when you get all of this information, I want to close the loop on. I think a lot of our internal communicators, they got into internal communications because they wanted to create content. They wanted to be creative. And now they're under pressure to develop this data skill, because without that data, now you have all this amazing data to inform what you create. And so I remember in our prep call, you had this really great checklist of questions that you use to assess if you're going to even invest in creating a piece of content. Do you remember this? You said that you guys ask yourself 4 questions.
Yeah, I think that every time that we create content, we want to make sure that it is going to reach out the biggest part of our audience. So, is the content easy to discover internally? Google has a very, very specific intranet, in a sense that it's more a search engine. So the content has to be indexed and it has to be discoverable. And you want to make sure that you have the right level of access, the right level of discoverability for your content to be visible within the organization. So, making sure that your content is actually visible. The second is the content actually measurable? If you create content that is very, very hard to measure, does it make sense to invest that much time? So you want to make sure that that measurement is a question that comes before. It cannot be an afterthought, because after you send your campaign, it's usually very, very difficult to retrieve the data if you do not have the right trackers, if you do not have the right metrics that are already embedded. So measurement cannot be an afterthought, and this is something that you want to assess before your campaign. So at Google, because we are a search engine company, we have our own internal search engine. It's called MoMA, and when you publish content at Google, you want to make sure that your content is visible within MoMA.
Got it. So it's visible and it is measurable. Anything else that folks need to ask themselves before they go creating a piece of content?
I would probably recommend that. And this is something I shared before, but I would probably recommend that, measurement cannot be an afterthought. So this is a conversation you need to have at the very beginning of your campaign. And whenever you have this conversation, also be ready to think how you're going to close the loop, how are you going to potentially reply to the feedback that you're going to receive. Again, it cannot be an afterthought. It cannot be something you want to be taken by surprise, because when you have feedback, you are creating a communications channel, right? So if you open a communications channel, you don't want to be the one surprised by the fact that there is a communication channels. I mean, you created it, so you want to make sure that you are ready to answer the feedback that is going to be submitted, and ready also to address the potential controversial points. So it almost means that for each communications campaign, you have a communication campaign for each of the communications campaign. You have to think about the internal reaction that your campaign is going to create.
That's so good. So, to kind of wrap some of this stuff up, I did want to ask about, you had talked about, every organization with this global pandemic being disrupted, and you had to organize and reorganize some of the things that you guys were doing. As we head into the fall, what's top of mind to you now, given the new normal? What are the internal communicators thinking about now at Google with this new the pandemic culture we find ourselves in?
So I'm sure it's been the case for a lot of your audience, and definitely for a lot of organizations. The past few months, as they have been pretty intense for internal communications, because suddenly internal communications has been this director of distributing all the critical information of employees trying to work or trying to adjust to a new normal. Internal communications has been playing a wonderful role to maintain some consistency or some normalcy in a very very chaotic world. So I would say that the focus for internal communications right now is actually I will speak definitely for myself and Measurement. The focus right now is to finally digest the amount of the surplus of additional work that has been generated from this period of time. Because yes, there has been a multiplication of campaigns. There has been a multiplications of channels, because suddenly you had much more communication. So digest all of that and finally go back to a new normal. I hate the term new normal, but this is what we should aim for. Being able to simply consider that measurement is part of internal communications. It cannot be something that is considered exotic or new, or something that is not part of internal communications. I would argue that measurement is very much at the core of internal communications. If you do not have measurement, you sometimes are missing a lot of opportunity to optimize your content. You are missing opportunities to showcase your content with your stakeholders, and you are also missing an opportunity to just shine internally. So measurement is definitely something that needs to be weaved into any internal communications campaign that you have. Yeah. I would also argue that measurement has been also very important and critical, because employees now are distributed all over the place. Sometimes they are working from home, and measurement is a great way to provide a bird's eye view on everything and reconcile or provide a central view on the campaigns that you have. So being able to provide this bird's eye view, being able to provide those consolidated view of your actions via measurement is something that is going to deliver a lot of value for yourself, for your colleagues, and for your leadership. So all in all, I only think that it makes sense for organization to be a little bit more mindful about what they do in terms of measurement if they are not doing anything yet.
Yeah. Well, and to wrap it up, I guess this is the last question. If we had to summarize when you talk about that bird's eye view, kind of this high level framework, if you could, go over one more time, if I'm just getting started or if I want to check my measurement strategy, can you provide what should be in that high level framework when you're checking to make sure you've got the right elements of your strategy?
That is something that I was thinking actually, because I know that on your website you offer some cheat sheets or documentations.
Yes, we love cheat sheets. Yes.
So I'm thinking maybe I can start working at a checklist for measurement for people who wants to go into their program, and also some recommendations of measurement programs based on the toolbox that we have at Google. Is it something that you would be interested in?
Absolutely. I think our listeners would really love that. I think not only for those just getting started, but also those who have been doing measurement that maybe need to revamp or who are ready for the next level to layer on. Okay, what else, can we be doing? I think would be huge. That would be amazing. Anything else that you want to tell our listeners? Any tips, anything that you wish you would have known, maybe your younger self, if you could go back and say, all right, before you start down this internal comms road, this is what you would advise? Any last minute thoughts?
This is going to be both embarrassing and probably very clumsy. But when I started my career, I was thinking that I was a little bit afraid of numbers, to be honest, and I was shying away from the idea that numbers would tell a story about my content, because this is the content I created, so it has to be good, right? Because I created it. But I think that there is a form of humility that we need to have with measurement, and it brings so much value the moment we start listening to the numbers that we have. And it is a fantastic opportunity, not only for internal communications professional, but for organizations, especially in a time like the one we're having right now. It is a fantastic opportunity to hear what is the pulse of an organization. How are your employees doing? Because you can capture a lot of information. And again, it is back to what I was saying with the idea of capturing qualitative data as well. You can capture a lot of information, not only about your campaign, but about how they're doing. What is the health of the organization in general? How are people feeling? And this idea of capturing the pulse of your own organization is something that I hope more organizations are going to do in the future. So we can have probably better work environments.
Yeah, that's so good. And I appreciate, we try to be vulnerable here, on this podcast. I try to be vulnerable, but to say, I think you hit the nail on the head. And probably the biggest gem out of this entire conversation is I think people are scared of the numbers for the reasons that you talked about. So I appreciate you being open enough to share that, because I think that's a lot. That's me, and that's a lot of our listeners out there too. So well, I can't thank you enough for giving us your time. There's so many good nuggets of information here for our listeners, and I know it will be so valuable when we get this whole thing produced. So I can't thank you enough.
Well, my pleasure. It was really a privilege to be here today. I'm really happy that we had this conversation, and I look forward to continue this conversation in the future.
Well, there you have it, the steps you can take to go from Snapshot to measuring the whole picture of your internal communications. And don't you just love Pierre's vulnerability? See, it's normal if you too feel initially afraid of the story your data will tell. But I encourage you to take just one step this month towards developing your own measurement methodology. And remember, start with what you can sustain. Don't forget to download today's resource guide at internalcommspro.com/show notes. Stay with us as our journey to closing the gap continues next week.
Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our theme music is Big Vision by Purple Planet Music. Have a follow-up question for today's guest? You can submit your question or ask it live during our new Backstage Live event series. To register for the show, submit a question for today's guest, or to download our free resource guide, visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes and click on this episode. Thank you for listening.